Hello everyone, it's Karen and welcome to another video. Today I've been thinking about doing this video for the last few days and I'm finally doing it here. So today we're going to be doing another career review. Now we haven't done a career review since December just because I've been making other videos and been quite busy and I haven't really found the time to do it, but we're going to do another one of these career videos, and today we're going to do one of my all-time favourite artists, and that being Tom Petty. Now, of course, Tom Petty was a great songwriter, you know, American songwriter, you know, had many great songs. Was of course of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and was involved in the Traveling Wilburys as well. So there's a lot to cover with this video, and so I'm going to go over them all as best I can. Might not be too long because you know how I like to go on, but this may be a part 1 or part 2. I'm not sure. We'll just see how we kind of go along as we're kind of going along with the video. So we're just going to get started. So Tom Petty was born in Gainesville, Florida on October the 20th, 1950. His mum, Catherine, or Kitty Petty, she was known as, was a local tax office worker, and his father, El, was a travelling salesman, and Tom had a younger brother named Bruce. Tom came from Gainesville, Florida, and he was sort of really into kind of westerns as a kid. He loved a lot of the arts. He loved cowboys and whatnot as a young kid. And then when he was 11 in 1961, 10 or 11, his uncle was working on the set of an Elvis movie, Follow That Dream, and Tom's aunt says to him, "Oh, Elvis is coming into town. Your uncle's working on a movie that Elvis is going to be in. Would you like to come see him?" And Tom's like, "Yeah, sure." So Tom met Elvis and went home a changed man. A changed kid rather. He then went and got all the Elvis records he could get his hands on, and he was an Elvis fan for a few years. And then in 1964, of course, Tom, who was 13 at the time, along with many other future musicians and people, watched the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and that was it for Tom. That was another moment where he thought, I want to be in a band, and this is what music's all about. And also other bands came, like the Rolling Stones, who Tom very much loved as well. Tom then started to go around like the neighbourhood in Gainesville to see if there were anybody he knew that played music and played guitars, and he met quite a few people. He met a guy called Tom Leadon, and he played guitar, and he met a few other guys around about that area, and they had a band called the Epics, and they played in the local Gainesville clubs and whatnot, and they were getting like offers to play in dances and whatnot. But then they found that the Epics was getting too corny of a name, so they changed the name to Mudcrutch. And it was through Tom Leadon that Tom met Mike Campbell, who was a guitar player, who played guitar. Tom at the time played, Petty at the time played bass. And so Tom met Mike, and Mike then came on. And the lineup of Mudcrutch at the time was Tom Petty on bass and vocals, Jim Lenihan on vocals, Tom Leadon on guitar and vocals, Mike Campbell on guitar, and Randall Marsh on the drums. And they all kind of played clubs, and they played local festival at their farm, and this got really well. A lot of the locals would turn up and they would come to see the this show. They then felt after a few years they were kind of but around about this time, after about a couple of years after Mudcrutch formed, Jim Lenihan and Tom Leadon both left. They moved on, and they were replaced with Danny Roberts and Benmont Tench on piano. And Benmont Tench was like Mike from Gainesville, and Tom, they were all from Gainesville. So they all kind of got together and they played in Benmont's living room, and they set up a recording equipment where they recorded quite a few demo songs because they really wanted to get a record contract. So Tom, after they made the recordings, they were pretty pleased with the result, and Tom took the tapes to Gainesville, to Hollywood, California, where that's pretty much the city where all the record companies are really located. All the big labels from like ABC, MGM, London, Capitol, Playboy Records, London Records, A&M, everyone, all the labels were pretty much in this city in Hollywood. Tom would play the demo to a few people, and some would be like, meh, you know, they would be interested, or some would say, oh, we'd like to do a demo, but Tom's like, but that's the demo. And then they went to MGM, and MGM liked what they heard, and so did London. So he had 2 offers, and it was on his way back from California, or when he got back, he had a call from Denny Cordell. And Denny Cordell was a producer who had produced a lot of the records that Tom and the guys had all admired, like Procol Harum, Whiter Shade of Pale. And he had a label called Shelter Records, and he was based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So they went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they recorded a few demos down there, and they had signed onto his Shelter Records label. And then they moved out to Gainesville, to Hollywood, California, and they went to Tulsa, and they recorded, and then they did a single called Depot Street, which was released in 1975. But alas, it didn't work. Depot Street was a flop, and the record company were very much only interested in keeping Tom on as a solo artist, and they just had to break the news. Tom had to break the news to the guys, look, record company kind of wants me, and they're not really interested in the band, which must have been very, very hard for them. You know, they all moved out to California together, and they were all like a family, and, you know, they were now on their own. But Tom and Mike kind of stayed together, and then Benmont knew a couple of guys who'd moved out to Gainesville. They weren't originally from there, who were Ron Blair and Stan Lynch. And Ron Blair was the bass player, and Stan Lynch was drums. And so they all kind of got together, and I think Ben had some ideas to do some demos, and Tom really liked what he saw, and he thought, I gotta have this band. So the team was put together, and they then needed to come up with a name. And for a while they had Tom Petty and Nitro, whatever that means, but Tom Petty had Tom Petty and the King Bees, which the others didn't really like. I mean, it's an alright name. I mean, but it might not have been something like that might have caught your eye, like Tom Petty and the King Bees. The people thought they were a blues band, and they were more kind of rocky. They were very influenced by Byrds, Beatles, Rolling Stones, those sort of bands. Then they eventually went for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and the rest is history. And they then recorded their debut album with Denny Cordell producing, and then it came out in November of 1976, which is this one, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. This is their first album, and this is a great debut album. I'm sure I have most of these on vinyl, but like I say, I'm just showing the CDs because it's quite easy to sort of show, really. But yeah, this is a great debut album. I mean, loads of great songs like Rockin' Around With You, Breakdown, The Wild One Forever, Anything That's Rock and Roll, Fooled Again I Don't Like It, Mystery Man, and American Girl, which became a huge, huge hit for them. That was recorded on the 4th of July, 1976 of all days, and it's got a great kind of hard rock, kind of rocky sound to it. It's a really great debut. Yeah, what more can you say about the sound? Just a great, great album. Really good sound to it, and it kind of, and it almost kind of was a taste of what was to maybe come in later years. But yeah, and a great cover as well, very iconic picture. But when the first album came out, it didn't really do so well. It didn't really do too good. It only really got airplay in cities like San Francisco and Boston, but in a lot of places like maybe like Cleveland or Chicago or New York, Los Angeles, it didn't really click on to a lot of people. But then the album came out in the UK, came out in England, and it did really well. And Tom and the Heartbreakers then went on tour in the UK supporting Nils Lofgren, and they were really well received. And they went down a storm down there, and all the papers and all the music press felt a connection to the first album, because this was at a time of punk and new wave, and the British press really loved this record. And Tom and the Heartbreakers went on television shows like Top of the Pops and the Old Grey Whistle Test, and they even performed around Europe, performed in places like Holland, Germany, and all those sort of places. And so yeah, they were really doing great with this European tour and England tour, and they went down so well over there. Then they were back in America, and once back in America, this is kind of like when the hard work kind of had to start. They did a little club appearances, and they were supporting people. They were being supporting people like Meatloaf, Blondie, Elvis Costello, Journey. They were support acts to people, and the J. Gills Band. So they really had to build their kind of reputation as a support band in the places they hadn't yet made it known. And within about a year, the first album was doing really, really well on the charts, and they had hit singles under their belts. So safe to say that Tom was doing quite well. Safe to say that they were off to a good start, but their kind of stardom was yet to come, as we'll touch upon later. So then, with Tom doing a lot of touring of the first album, he kind of wanted to get a second album out. So he began to write some songs, and once he got 10, he just went to the studio and did them with Denny Cordell producing, and they recorded the second album in May of 1978 called You're Gonna Get It. And a really, really good second album. Personally like both. Still got the same kind of sound as the first album does, but still really, really good. Really like When the Time Comes, You're Gonna Get It, Hurt, Too Much Ain't Enough, one that's kind of grown on me in recent years, I Need to Know, Listen to Her Heart, No Second Thoughts, and Baby's a Rock and Roller. So yeah, really, really great second album, one I really like a lot. And The second album did really good in the charts, and the Heartbreakers kind of were getting up and up a bit more. They were kind of still playing arenas. They were still playing auditoriums, theatres and halls and those sort of places, but they kind of moved on from the clubs and were now starting to get bigger venues. They played places like the Winterland in San Francisco, and on New Year's Eve 1978 they played in Santa Monica, and they had Del Shannon as a guest there, and Del Shannon would be an important part of the story we'll touch upon later on. But kind of around about this time, Tom and Denny had kind of started to change. Things kind of started to change a bit. Denny was kind of not really able to work with the band as close as he would like to, you know, it was kind of apparent that, you know, maybe Denny was going to have to step aside and spend working with time with other people. You know, things had kind of changed really, and so things kind of needed to. They were on the hunt to look for a new producer, and so they got in Jimmy Iovine to produce the next record. And Jimmy had a good track record. When you think of him, Jimmy had engineered Bruce Springsteen on Born to Run and Darkness in the Edge of Town. He also recorded with Patti Smith, John Lennon, Meatloaf. So a pretty good CV, I'd say. So when Tom played some of the songs to Jimmy, Jimmy loved a lot of the songs that Tom was writing. I think he played like stuff like Refugee and Here Comes My Girl. Jimmy was kind of wanting the band to get their best sound on tape, so he would kind of push them a bit too hard, and he would sometimes be quite critical of Stan Lynch's drumming sometimes, and there's like documentary footage of like Jimmy saying to Tom, I think he should just play straight, you know, start with their shakes because they're clashing, and then Stan comes out to him like, dude, there's a glass on that side of the wall, you're supposed to be on the other side. And Mike kind of found it a bit too much and just kind of left town for a few days, and then eventually did come back. But at one point during the sessions, there was a bit of a disagreement, and Shelley Yakis, who was the recording engineer, took Stan to like drum shopping because he did drums are punk ass. But sometimes Jimmy's attitude to Stan would be, just get your drum tracks done and get out of my way. And Stan must have felt pretty output by it, pretty, you know, pushed out by that. You know, he just thought, well, whatever. And I think either Stan walked out or was fired during the sessions. They then tried other drummers, but then they've kind of felt that while they were good, they weren't Stan Lynch. So they got Stan back in, and recording, they continued. But also around about this time, Tom got into his first of quite a few disputes. In 1979, around about this time, Shelter had been distributed by ABC, but they had initially, I think, been a small independent label owned by MCA, and then ABC took over their distribution. And around about that time, Tom, when they renegotiated their deal with ABC to try and get like a better deal, Tom told ABC and Shelter, look, if anything happens with our contract, if for instance it's sold to anybody else, you need to have our consent with whoever they're selling the contract onto, and that was approved by ABC. But without checking the clause, they went ahead and sold the contract of Shelter and ABC to MCA. And Tom was absolutely infuriated by this. He was just not going along with it. He felt he'd been sold like a grocery. So Tom basically was just not going to go along with it. And the management then just said, right, let's sort this out. And so they looked at Tom's royalty rate and found that Tom had been with Shelter since Mudcrutch, but had not gotten a good percentage and was not getting a good royalty. He wasn't getting any income. And therefore this meant that Tom was bankrupt, technically. And what that would mean for him was that if Tom would show that he's bankrupt, it would mean that the court could declare the contract null and void and enable him to start afresh. So if they proved that in court, Tom was basically able to walk. So that's what Tom did. He ended up filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and they were still making the album, but there was a lot of uncertainty in the air as to whether it was ever going to come out. But they all said that, you know, we're not going to put this record out until, you know, all the legal situations have been resolved. And there was even uncertainty and concern that the record companies or the courts and the lawyers of MCA were going to come in and take away the evidence of what they were doing. So they had to write the tapes of pseudonyms on the tape boxes and try and get the tapes out of the studio and put them in a secret location so that nobody could find them. But eventually, however, a legal agreement was made and a settlement was reached between Tom and MCA. MCA gave him his publishing and all his songs back, and they agreed that he would stay on the label, but, you know, he needed to get a label to stay on and distribute the record. So Danny Bramson, who was a record executive, had his own label, Backstreet, and he'd also been working at the Universal Amphitheatre and been booking concerts there. And Danny met Tom, and he said to Tom, you know, Tom, if we can get you a good royalty, and, you know, would you stay at MCA if I had you on my label and MCA distributed the record? And Tom's like, I'm for it. And Danny was somebody that Tom really felt he could trust, and it was a good working relationship. So in October of 1979, Damn the Torpedoes was finally released, and this is a great album. This is regarded as Tom Petty's seminal album. This was the record that really propelled him to stardom and international status, even though he'd been known international for long before that. But this was the record that kind of made him the artist he was. And it's undeniable. This is a great album. Refugee, Here Comes My Girl, Even the Losers, Don't Do Me Like That. They were all the kind of big hits, but there's other great ones like Shadow of a Doubt, Century City, Louisiana Rain. That's one of my favourites from that album. Great album. One of my all-time favourite albums. And I've actually reviewed this, and you're going to get it on the channel. But so if you want to see me talk about them in a bit more detail, you can go back to them. But this is definitely a great album. One of my favourites, and yeah, it's regarded as a classic album. So with that album, the Heartbreakers had now made it, and they were now playing bigger venues, arenas and auditoriums and whatnot, and open air venues. So the Heartbreakers were now really getting up in the world, and the Damn the Torpedoes tour was a big tour. It went from the kind of autumn winter of 1979 into the early summer of 1980 the following year. So Tom was like in America, Europe, Australia, Japan, those places. Damn the Torpedoes really propelled him internationally as well. So it's kind of like the hunt, isn't it? So it's kind of like it's on you now. You have to follow it up with another great album. And Tom kind of felt like, oh, I've got to follow this up now, and this is going to be pretty difficult. You know, the first two albums he kind of didn't find any problem with following up, but now that he'd made it big with Damn the Torpedoes, it was kind of like, how do I follow this up? And around this time, Tom had a bit of personal hardship to deal with. His mum had not been in best of health for a long time. She'd been very ill for a long time and just wasn't really getting any better. And Tom had seen her during the after the Damn the Torpedo tour ended, and he kind of felt like she didn't have very long left to go. And she passed away in the October of 1980, which, although Tom did feel a sense of relief that she wasn't ill or suffering anymore, it was still a huge loss and blow to him. And he kind of felt bad that he really wanted to do something to make her better, and he felt it was a shame that she didn't get to live to see his success. But I know she knew that he was going to make it. There was no doubt about it. So Tom was then recording the next album with Jimmy Iovine on board, and he also this was around about the time he knew Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac, and they collaborated on a song or two in this album. And Stevie had a solo album, and Tom had written her a song, but he ended up keeping one song for his album, but then he wrote another song for the album, her solo album, which was Stop Dragging My Heart Around, which became a great song and a great solo hit for Stevie. And the Heartbreakers were all involved in that track. And I've actually got the single with me, but I forgot to pull it up for you. But anyway, really great song, Stop Dragging My Heart Around. And then, as the album was complete, they initially were going to call it Benmont's Revenge, but then it got a better another title. But as the album was about to come out, the record company MCA were going to release it at an extra $1 of $9.98. This was part of a scheme they had called Superstar Pricing, which meant that they would release albums at $1 more than the initial price. So the initial price was like $8.98, but they were going to put Tom's record out at $9.98, and Tom was like, that's not happening with me, you're not doing that. And he basically would not give the album to the record company until it could be released at an affordable price. And then, like, the press, there was a big sort of front page cover of Rolling Stone magazine of where he tore the dollar bill in half on the front page of the cover, which I have in a book somewhere. And eventually MCA just went, okay, he can have his record at the regular price and somebody else can get the $9.98. So Tom was kind of pleased that he won over and was proud that he got his way again, but he kind of felt that no one was really publicly backing him on this. But he then said in an interview that Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones' record company, were going to do it with the Stones, and Mick Jagger showed them the cover of Tom ripping the dollar bill in half on Rolling Stone magazine, and he's like, there's no way you can do that. And their record label said, we can't do that, we're going to have the Stones out of their normal price. So that was kind of thing that Tom was basically, he wanted what his fans, what he felt he wanted for the fans to be able to go out and afford his album. And it eventually came out in May of 1981, which was this album, Hard Promises. And it's often said that following up a seminal album is not easy, but Tom managed to follow it up with another great album, and another one of my favourite Tom Petty albums. I mean, you got great songs like The Waiting, which is a great song, one of my favourite Tom Petty songs. Also, A Woman in Love and It's Not Me is on it. Something Big, King's Road, Letting You Go, A Thing About You, and You Can Still Change Your Mind. And Stevie Nicks appeared on the track Insider, which was the one that Tom was going to give for her and then end up keeping for himself, but still had Stevie on the track. A really great song and album, and still carries a lot of the good production elements that Damn the Torpedoes did. Really great album, and yeah, it showed that Tom Petty was still making good records. So definitely a great album, one of my favourites from the year. And the Heartbreakers then went on tour, and they had a homecoming concert at the end of the tour in Gainesville, the first time they played in Gainesville since the early Mudcrutch days. So this was a kind of a big special moment for them. But kind of Tom was feeling as if, he was not really the same person for a period, He felt kind of toasted. I mean, it's understandable. He'd been through a long album, a long tour. He'd lost his mum. He kind of felt he was on his guard, and it was a long time before he felt he was the person that he was again. And A Woman in His Love is not... but around at this time, it wasn't just Tom who was also kind of feeling it. Bassist Ron Blair, by this point, was kind of starting to drift. He kind of didn't really like being in the band anymore. He wasn't really happy for a while, and the Heartbreakers had kind of known that something was up. Ron, I think, often was not present during the Hard Promises sessions, so the bass was kind of often down to Mike or Tom. So after the Hard Promises tour ended sometime between 81 or 82, Ron left the band, and he didn't just leave the band, he left the music business altogether and then opened up a beachwear store on Ventura Boulevard, which that was something that they would never have called for. But Ron still remained friendly with the band, still came to their rehearsals and still went to their concerts and whatnot. And he recalled like Jimmy Iovine seeing him at like the Universal Amphitheatre and saying, "Ron, how does it feel, watching the band without you?" And he's like, "Hey, it's okay, I'm just watching them as a fan and I'm okay with it, So the hunt was now on to get a new bass player. And so around about this time also, I mentioned this guy earlier, but Tom was producing an album for Del Shannon, which was this one, Drop Down and Get Me. And Del Shannon was a rock and roll artist who Tom admired in the 1960s and was a huge fan of, as were all the Heartbreakers. And they all appeared on this record, which came out in 1981. And it had a comeback hit for Del, which is a version of a song called Sea of Love, which I'm not sure who did the original of that one, but that was the album they did, Drop Down and Get Me. And during the sessions, Tom says to Del, "Oh, we're looking for a new bass player. Do you know of anybody who could be really good on the bass and anything like that?" And Del says, "I've got this guy in my tour band who's really good. I think you'll like him. Can I bring him down?" And Tom's like, "Yeah, sure." And then, of course, walked in Howie Epstein. Now, Howie Epstein was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he played the bass with Del. And Tom, he had a very striking appearance when he walked in. He had like a pompadour, golden earring, and Tom really liked him, hear him play. And then when Tom heard Howie sing backup, he was really impressed. He sang like an angel, really. And Tom's like, "This is the one. This guy's going to be in my band." Now Tom said later, "Yes, I was in an awkward spot because you're not supposed to be stealing a bass player from the artist you're producing." And so he went to see Del rehearse in Phoenix, and after the rehearsal, Tom went to Howie and said, "How would you feel about joining my band, joining the Heartbreakers?" And Howie was like, "I'd love to. I'm a fan of the group, and I really would love to I would love to join your band. So yeah, I'm in." And then Del somehow found out what was going on, and so he phoned up Tom, really annoyed, saying, "Look, you can't take Howie. He's the guy in my band. I've got a tour lined up. You can get anyone you want, but don't take Howie." And Tom's like, "Del, I love you. You're great, but I'm taking Howie." And Tom said to Del got over it, sort of. But Del did eventually forgive Tom for that, and so Howie joined the band and he fitted in well, and Benmont said that he turned out to be one of his best friends. And so they then started to work on the next record, which came out in November of 1982, which was this album, Long After Dark. And it's another really, really great album. It's one of my favourites. I know a lot of fans don't often like this one too much, but it's one that I really like a lot, Long After Dark. This was kind of like the dividing point between Tom and Jimmy Iovine. There was a bit of differences during the Long After Dark sessions. Tom kind of felt there was a lot of material that he recorded on the sessions that didn't make the final record that he felt could have made a better album. Like, there was a great song in here called, there was a song during those sessions called Keep Me Alive, which is a great song, which was an acoustic song that Tom had done. But Jimmy Iovine didn't really agree with it, and so it was vetoed. So this was the kind of point where, Tom said that Jimmy was sort of spending more time on the phone and less time in the studio, as Tom would describe it. So that was kind of like the last full album that Tom and Jimmy did together, but a great album, one of my favourites. I love One Story Town, the hit You Got Lucky, Deliver Me, Change of Heart, We Stand a Chance, Straight Into Darkness, Between Two Worlds, and A Wasted Life. Again, whole album is great. Really, really great album. And also for You Got Lucky, they did something different. They did something quite interesting and intriguing. They had made music videos before for pretty much down the Torpedoes. They made videos for their songs, if it was a single or not. And they wrote a little film around it. It was set in like the desert, and like it was a sci-fi based type of film for the video You Got Lucky. And really great concept, and it was kind of like a revolutionary start for MTV. So Tom Petty kind of really, I wouldn't say he kind of started the whole video trend, but he kind of led the way a bit, even though there was stuff like Michael Jackson and Bruce Springsteen would later do stuff like that. Tom Petty was kind of the one that started it. So Tom went on tour Long After Dark, toured Europe and America, and while he was on tour, he kind of was driving. They were going through southern parts of America, of the country, going into southern towns, and he kind of started to come up with a concept of his upbringing within the South. And after the Long After Dark tour ended in 1983, Tom and the Heartbreakers kind of took some time off and decided they would start working on the next record. They initially going to start by themselves with just Tom and Mike producing. And it was apparent that it didn't really go so well. It was kind of the first time they were not doing any touring. They were kind of off the touring. They had some more time on their hands, and there wasn't a routine plan for them. They didn't really know what to do. They just really went into the studio to work. And drugs began kind of starting to fly around in the studio, and it was obvious that their creativity was going. And they were trying to work on this song called Rebels, which Tom said, had I been sober, it would have been more easier. And Tom did a demo of the song, played the demo, and he thought it sounded a lot better than what he was trying to do. It was just infuriating him that he wasn't able to get it what he wanted. So he went upstairs to another room of the house and just punched his hand against the wall, which is a bit of a stupid move. He didn't just do injury to his hand, he actually pulverized his hand, powdered it. So he ended up going to the hospital to get it seen to, and the doctor told him, well, there's a possibility you might not play guitar again. And Tom had like a cast on his hand for a good part of that year, and like had little electrodes that would make his hand close it electrically himself, and because the hand wouldn't do it so bad because he was in a lot of agony. So Tom basically felt, I've got to get help on this album. So he got Jimmy Iovine on board again and began working with Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, and he recorded, and then he and Dave Stewart wrote a few songs on the record, and it then came out in the March of 1985, Southern Accents. And it initially started off as a double album, but ended up just becoming a single album, and another great album. I do really like this album. It's got a bit of an 80s sound to it, but still really, really good. I love Rebels, Don't Come Around Here No More, which is a big hit single, the title track, Make It Better Forget About Me. I do like the live version though, and the Southern Accents, Pack Up Plantation Life, which we'll talk about later on, Spike, Dogs on the Run, and The Best of Everything. But the only Tom Petty song I'm not so keen in this album is a song called Mary's New Car. No, that's not my favourite. And I love this one called The Best of Everything. And that was a leftover song from the Hard Promises album. The story behind that song was Tom had it sort of kind of lying about since Hard Promises, and they were going to use the song for a movie, but MCA I don't think would allow Warner Brothers to use it. So Tom gave the track to Robbie Robertson, who overdubbed horns and got in a harmony singer, Richard Manuel, to do it, and it came out beautifully, and it's one of my favourite Tom Petty songs, The Best of Everything. Really great album. As I say, even Tom Petty did say that even though it wasn't the album he intended to make, he said it liked the album it became. So yeah, and it's a really good album. I do like it a lot. Southern Accents 1985. So once that was kind of out the way and done, and they managed to sort of get everything back on track again, they then went back on tour for the Pack-Up Plan for the Southern Accents tour, and they then made recordings of that tour. They recorded a couple of concerts, and it came out as this live album, Pack Up the Plantation Live, which this is one of my favourite live albums of all time. A great live album. It has stuff from the Southern Accents tour, but it's also got... Tom went back to his archive in the vaults and went back from previous tours and put in some performances from there as well. In fact, Tom had said in an interview he had intended to make a live album after Long After Dark of stuff they'd done from 77 up to the Long After Dark tour, but he kind of felt like it would maybe be too soon, and he didn't really want to follow it up with a live record, so he kind of put it on hold. And then when Southern Accents came, when the tour came, he then did this live album, Pack Up Plantation Live. Great live album. This was one of the early Tom Petty CDs I bought, actually, and it's a special one for me. I bought it back in 2011. It's one I still come back to and love. He does covers. He does a great cover of The Byrds, So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. Great cover of Needles and Pins from The Searchers. Great versions of The Waiting, Breakdown, American Girl, Refugee, Southern Accents, Rebels. A great cover of the Everly Brothers song Stories We Could Tell. They recorded this at the Wilton Theatre in Los Angeles, and the Wilton Theatre concert was also filmed for this video release at the time, which is called Pack Up the Plantation Live. You can't get this on... This is not available anywhere else, unfortunately. Now, this is only available on video, but I do have a bootleg DVD of it downstairs, which I forgot to pull out. But I just thought I'd pull out the video to show for the video. But anyway, great concert. One of my favourite live performances from Tom and the band. He had a couple of female backing singers and a horn section, which I know people probably won't like, but it's still a really great concert, and it's still a great performance. Definitely one of my favourites from the of all time, really, and just wish it would come out on DVD. It's just a shame it's not out on DVD or Blu-ray. But anyways, really great live performance and album. One of my favourite live albums of all time was this one, Pack Up Plantation Live. Thing about this one though, I've got it on LP as well, but the LP's got a couple of extra tracks which are I Need to Know and You Got Lucky, and they were omitted. I'm not sure why they've done that. I think they probably couldn't fit space on the one disc and maybe had to put it as a 2-disc, and then maybe the double CD might have been expensive at the time, because this is in the very early days of CDs. So that was that, but you know, still great to have, and one of my favourite live albums of all time. So yeah, great one, Pack Up Plantation Live. And then around about that time, after the tour was complete in August of 1985, a month later, they appeared at the Farm Aid benefit, which was a benefit concert for family farmers in America, and appeared on that bill was Bob Dylan, and there were other acts like Roy Orbison, Johnny Cash, Foreigner. So it feels like a great concert. John Fogerty, I think, was there. So Tom basically and Bob performed together during that set, and a year later, in 1986, they went on tour as Tom Petty and Bob Dylan went on tour together. On the True Confessions tour, and they went around Europe, America, they went around Australia, Japan, America for a good part of 1986, and it was a great experience for them. And I've got a live CD of one of the concerts from that, which I forgot to pull up, but yeah, definitely a great. And if I'd been around back in 1986, I would definitely went to see that tour if I lived in America, of course. But then round out that tour, Tom, Bob, and Mike began to write some songs together. And the Heartbreakers had done some work on Bob Dylan's albums before. I think Empire Burlesque they'd done a bit of work on Bob, and they had then started to work on a new record with Tom and the Heartbreakers, and they wrote a song together and went on this album, Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, which came out in April of 1987. And Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, I know it's not a lot of fans' favourites, and somehow it's got its fans, it's got some that love it and some that don't. I'm sort of in the middle. It's an okay record. I like the track Jammin' Me, which was the hit single. It'll All Work Out's one of my favourite songs on here. All Mixed Up's great. Title track. Damage You've Done's pretty good. How Many More Days. It's not a bad record. It's not terrible, but it's not the best Tom Petty album, really. It's good, but there are better albums that are to come, and there's better albums I've talked about before. But it's not bad. I do quite like the cover though, with like the kind of, on the back of the LP you can tell whose is whose and where it's taken from. So I think that's Howie, that's Tom, that's from Mike, Stan and Benmont. It's kind of like a strip of each member, and it's in like a different colour, almost kind of very colourful, very kind of 80s cover. So yeah, really good album, but maybe needs to kind of grow on me a bit more. But within a few weeks after that album came out, Tom found himself in the centre of a earth-shocking blow when his house burned down. It was said to be arson, but the person was never caught, and Tom lost a lot in that house. He lost pretty much a lot of things he owned. The family had to stay in a motel, and it must have been a horrendous thing for it to have happened. But Tom said, we were just lucky to wake up and be alive the next day, and to realise that you were still alive. But they had a tour booked for that before the fire happened for the album, and they decided that they would go ahead with that tour and not cancel it. And Tom said that tour really proved therapeutic for him. They did America, and then they went to Israel on that tour, and they continued on the Bob Dylan tour, playing in Europe, so in Italy, England, and whatnot, and I think Spain, Belgium, might have been, I'm not sure. But at the end of that tour, there was a little party for Tom because it was his birthday. His birthday coincided with the end of the tour. Jeff Lynne was at the party, Ringo was there, all the Heartbreakers, Roger McGuinn and George Harrison was there, of course. And during that party, Tom had been given an advanced tape of George Harrison's album Cloud 9, which Jeff Lynne had produced and was a very critically acclaimed album. That was George's comeback album. And I think Tom really liked what he heard, and he thought, I'd like to work with Jeff. And so Tom had been an admirer of Jeff and the Electric Light Orchestra, who Jeff Lynne had done. That was Jeff Lynne's band. But he kind of felt that but I think he found out that Jeff was not really doing outside productions at the time. That later changed when he produced George Harrison. So one day, as I've probably talked about when I reviewed the album Full Moon Fever, Tom was driving up Los Angeles, and he happened to see Jeff, and he's like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And Jeff's like, "I'm producing Brian Wilson." And he said, "Oh, I liked what you did with George. I'd like to get to work with you one day." And Jeff said, "Yeah, sure." And Jeff and George were in a Los Angeles restaurant, and Tom walked in, and George was about to ask Jeff for Tom's number. And when Tom walked in, George says to Tom, "Oh, just ask Jeff for your number there." And it all came under strange coincidences. And Jeff was also recording with Roy Orbison, who was a rock and roll singer who Tom and Jeff and George had all admired, and I done a career video of him as well, and Bob was there as well, and they got Bob on board. And for whatever reason, George had his guitar at Tom Petty's house, and George got his guitar from Tom, and they went to Bob Dylan's garage studios, and then they recorded the Traveling Wilburys Volume 1, which came out in 1988. And Tom remembers this with great fun, great album. We've touched upon the Wilburys in great detail in the Robertson Creamer, but still going to touch upon them on here. So basically they kind of did the album over a period of a month in May of 1988, because Bob had to go out and tour at the end of the month, so they thought, right, we'll meet in May and start recording mid-May. I think Bob was about to go out at the end of the month, so they said, let's meet in the middle of the month, so we'll do that. So yeah, this was really a great album, and it was kind of very positive feeling album. It kind of feels as if they were all having fun doing it, and Tom said in interviews that they all had fun doing it. Yeah, great record, and there's a great documentary about it on YouTube, which you can see, which I've got on the Traveling Wilburys collection on CD and DVD, which I've probably show in a future video. But yeah, really great album, as I say. So it just feels like a very positive album. I think it makes it all interesting. What made the Wilburys successful was the fact that all artists had careers before, and there were probably people who'd known of people through other things, like, of course, George with the Beatles, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Jeff Lynne with the Electric Light Orchestra, and Bob and Roy having solo careers of their own. So I think that's probably how what made the Wilburys great, and these 5 great people. You can't go wrong there. And they recorded the hit single song called Handle with Care, which George Harrison had initially was going to do a B-side for a solo single, and Warner Brothers, I think, had said to him, this song's too good to be a B-side. You know, you make this another on another album. So George and Bob like, oh, I'm going to write this song, and Bob's like, what's it called? And they looked around the room, and there was these boxes in like the corner of this room, and they said Handle with Care, and George said, it's called Handle with Care. So they had a title of a song. And Jeff and Tom were also recording with Roy Orbison on his Mystery Girl album, and as were the Heartbreaks, were all participating on that record too. And Tom started to work on a solo album, and the Wilburys album came out in the October of '88. It was doing well in the charts, it was doing great, and then of course Roy passed away in December of 1988, which to everyone was a huge shock, because they loved Roy and they all loved his music and they loved his songs, you know, and they loved him as a person, as a friend. It was a huge blow. But for the End of the Line video, they had a tribute where his guitar was perched on top of a rocking chair, which is very poignant, and a picture of Roy beside it, which is a very poignant moment in the video. So actually what we're going to do here, we're probably going to stop here, and we're going to cut and do part 2. So we've done like 1976 up to 1988. So we're going to come back and do the rest of the career once I've had a little drink of water. So we're going to take a break from here and we're going to be right back.